Hello, I'm Emiliano Achavo, President of the Maui Woodturners Association. I'm here today with Dr. Fern Duvall. He's the state wildlife biologist. We have a lot to talk about today. It's going to be very interesting. We are surrounded by native plants here in his house. We're grateful that he invited us to have a little talk story session. I just took my mask off. We're going to try to observe the social distancing and we are going to be safe. So let's do it. Okay, well, we have a lot of questions for Dr. Duvall today. Let's start with one that it's worldwide and one that is really related to us woodturners, the difference between island Cook pine and Norfolk Island pine. Everybody calls any kind of pine just NIP, Norfolk Island pine. But I have come to know that it's not the case. What is the most predominant pine in Hawaii?
It is the Cook Island pine from the Cook Islands, and it's one of 19 types of Araucarias. And the name Araucaria comes from Arauco in Argentina. I believe that's an Argentinian word. That's where most of them are at. But the Cook Island pine comes from the Cook Islands, and in New Caledonia there's an island called Norfolk Island, and that's where the Norfolk Island pine comes from. In Hawaii, almost everyone says Norfolk pine, but they actually are looking at and are talking about Cook Island pine. They don't mix the two of them because they have fallen at 6 months apart from each other. When the Norfolk has pollen that's out that could hybridize and make a cross between the two, the Cook Island doesn't, and vice versa. So you have Cook Island. The reason it's a big problem is that they look so similar, especially when they're little, and the horticultural trade calls everything Norfolk Island. So they sell it to the mainland as Norfolk Island for people to have it as Christmas trees or whatever, but it's all Cook Island. In fact, there's I think only 11 on the island of Maui that are actual true Norfolk Island pines. And they don't even produce seed or have the cones very often. The other way to look is to tell them apart. A Cook Island pine is sort of oblong, and the scales that are on it, where the seeds are all together still in the cone, you can't possibly pick it up with a bare hand. It's like fish hooks on the seeds. The Norfolk has almost a completely round, much smaller cone, and it does have pokey things on it, but it's not like fish hooks.
Uh-huh. Interesting. The other thing that I heard is their appearance. The Cook pine is Araucaria columnaris, like a column.
That's right.
So they're pretty even, and the Norfolk pine is more sort of uneven, right?
That's right. The Norfolk pine the Norfolk Araucaria has really long limbs that it retains for a long time, so that you actually have like a pyramid-shaped tree. If you've ever seen one, it's really remarkable. Whereas the Cook Island has pretty much like a column, goes straight up. And actually, where they come from, they're used to having all of their branches ripped off except the very top, so that it looks like a column instead of a tree almost. So that's where the name comes from.
Well, that has really helped us dispel the myth about the two different species.
I'm not sure of a primary cause to have branches that are in 5, 7, or other multiples, but It probably has to do with the age of the tree and the girth of the tree, how big it gets, that it has the branches.
Okay, that was very interesting about the Cook pine. The other question that relates to us wood turners is the difference between the native Kou, K-O-U, which was the preferred wood of the Hawaiians, the ancient pre-contact Hawaiian bowl carvers. That is the Koia subcordata species, and the one that a lot of people call it the Tahitian Kou, even though it's not from Tahiti, we just learned, or better known as the Geiger tree or Haole Kou. Haole means foreign in Hawaiian. So how can we tell those two species apart?
There are several ways to tell the non-native Kou from the real thing. The easiest is if you have a tree that is flowering and it has flowers on it. The non-native one has red-orange, almost red flowers. They look very similar in type of flower to the real Kou, but the color is pale orange and almost yellow, and apparently sometimes they can even be white. So it's bright orange, it's not the native one. The other way is if they have fruits, and they often have a lot of fruit throughout the year, if it has a brown, hard nut, sort of like a walnut brown, that's the native one. The Geiger tree, the other one, has white, fleshy fruits. So you can tell that way. Finally, if you walk right up to it and you look at the leaves look similar in shape, but if you feel them like sandpaper, so the Geiger tree is like a sandpaper type leaf. And the native Kou, subcordata, has really smooth leaves, doesn't have hair, and it definitely is not sandpaper-like. And it's like that right from the start, right when it's growing. So it's easy to tell them apart that way. The native one has wonderful wood qualities. The non-native one, I've heard that it doesn't have very good qualities. It's much softer. And the non-native one is actually something from the Caribbean. So Florida, Central America, and down through Panama, things like that. That's the Geiger tree. It is not Tahitian, and it's not the real Kou.
Great. Another mystery solved by Dr. Duvall. All right, another great question that we have today is Koa is king in Hawaii, Acacia Koa. But we also have what people used to say the cousin of the Koa, which is the Koa'ia. Dr. Duvall provided me with a seed pod from a Koa and a seed pod from a Koa'ia. You can see that there is a big difference in between them. He's going to tell us more about the two different, now we know they're two different species, not just, they're not cousins anymore.
So, yes, you can see from the pods they're very different. The most amazing thing about it, though, is the alignment of the seeds inside of the pod. If it is a Koa'ia, they are lined up end to end, never sideways with each other. The Koa is sideways, and so we didn't open this one up, but you can sort of see here that they're all laying sideways in this pod. The other thing is that this is a short pod of a Koa'ia. I have had them up to 14 inches long.
Wow.
They don't get wider than this, but they'll get much longer, and they always end up with a sharp tip at the bottom, which you never see in the Koa.
14 inches. Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so two different species, Koa and Koa'ia. A lot of history behind both of them.
So the other ways you can tell them apart is not so much on the leaf. You have some Koa trees that have short leaves that are almost straight, but so they look sort of like Koa'ia leaves. But the thing that's really different is the flowers. The flower of the Koa'ia is yellow. The flower of the Koa, Acacia Koa, is white or
Big difference.
What about the wood hardness?
Oh yeah, that's true. We forgot to talk about the density in the wood. Dr. Duvall gave me some pieces of beautiful Koa'ia tree that sadly passed away and had to be taken out for safety reasons. And I cannot believe the difference. The wood of the Koa'ia is much, much denser than Koa.
yeah, that was one of the density of the wood, the difference of it was one of the main things that specialists in wood quality in Wisconsin, where the national laboratory is for the different woods, looked at the wood and the density, and they said if there were no other differences, no differences in flowers, no difference in leaves or in seed pods and the way seeds are, just based on the characters of the wood and the density, these would have to be a different species. So the density of the wood is really one of the main characters for the tree. The other one is Koa'ia. So Hawaiians pronounce it Koa'ia and a little bit different. But the one thing that they did do, Hawaiians, with Koa'ia, which grows lower down on the mountains in Hawaii, in a relatively narrow band where there isn't so much rain, sort of a mesic, drier forest. That's where you'd find Koa'ia for the most part. But the thing that the Hawaiians would do is they would take young branches like this, and they would turn them and knot them, and then they would go away. And they would come back when the tree is grown, and the knot would stay in place. And that was what they used for fish hooks. So it was the koa for fishing. You would tie the branches into a round. If you waited years, you would get a much thicker round piece of wood that could be notched to become a fish hook. They didn't do that with koa.
Very interesting. Okay, we're standing here right under the shade of a beautiful Koa, Acacia Koa specimen. And something that caught my eye, something is growing all around it and in between and right next to it. And Dr. Duvall is going to tell us what is this growing right next to the Koa and why is it growing next to the Koa.
Okay, this is one of the different, there's like 5 species of sandalwood in the islands. This is one of them. This is the green flowered one. You can actually see the green flowers on it, and you can see green fruits that are only twice the size and look like little olives. So the reason, first of all, why is it growing where it is? It's because these are semi-parasitic, meaning part parasitic. The roots of these need usually to have a host plant that they put part of their root system right into, and they use some of the nutrients and some of the water of the host plant. So it's getting some of its water for growth and some of the nutrients from the koa tree. And you'll often find this happening in Hawaii where koa or a'ali'i or other plants are growing with sandalwood. And they can actually make those root connections to many, many things that are around them. But some things are a lot better. This one came up on its own from a seed that was in the ground here. So, obviously does it well.
Yes.
So, like I said, there are multiple species of sandalwood. One of them is an endangered one. It's one of the red-flowered ones. It occurs on Maui and on Lanai, and I believe also on Oahu. And it is called Santalum Lanai-enza.
Wow.
As if I think that must have been connected with being first found and described from the Lanai. It is endangered. The other ones are not. But are there many of them? No. All the other sandalwoods are not endangered. You can find them pretty easily. But they were harvested to a great extent by people selling it to China. In fact, China has called the Hawaiian Islands Sandalwood Islands. And the king, one of the last kings, the later kings in Hawaii, caught onto the trade. He sent people into the mountains, and they had to carry out on their back as much as they could. They dug large ship-size, like the hull of a ship. It's dug out in the mountains. You can still go see one if you go in on Molokai. You can actually see this, where it was dug out to exact size of the sailing ships that went from Hawaii to China, and they would fill all of that up by cutting trees. Once it was full, they would carry it down. It was really bad for Hawaiians because they had to abandon their farms and anything else they did to do this, and so people started to starve because of this. The good thing, if you will, is that they got rid of almost all of it. And what was left was things like this, the little crooked, not growing so straight, not growing so beautiful. That was because probably all of the really straight, wonderful, gigantic sandalwood, all the juice for them were cut down and taken to the Orient and burned in funeral pyres and things like that. So, yeah, so that's why they're rare today, because they've never recovered. They've never been outplanted. You know, once you had cattle and pastures and things like that right where they would grow, or houses, you can see that this is what would have been around here on its own, but it's all been taken out for the most part.
Very interesting.
So they are rare in the sense that there's not many of them, but they're not endangered, except for the one species. And it's something you can buy, and like if you live in Makalau or many other places, you can go to a store, you can go to the Maui Nui Botanical Gardens during Arbor Day and ask for a sandalwood appropriate for your area, and it would be beautiful looking. The flowers smell beautiful, and eventually you have incredible wood.
All right. Yeah, we have a beautiful native Hawaiian hibiscus.
This is called St. John Janus, after the botanist St. John.
St. John's. Beautiful. Fern, this is a native Hawaiian, indigenous to Hawaii.
Endemic.
Endemic.
Found only in Hawaii and nowhere else. It's one of the scented ones, one of the white ones.
And what's the name?
It is called
Not scientific, but
Koia Koa'ia.
Koia Koa'ia. Oh, white, yeah. Awesome. Interesting.